Today we are going to discuss the war on salt and why salt is not as bad as people think it is. So it's always nice to know that people are listening and joining in. If you ever do have more questions, feel free to ask for my email from Desiree. We do have articles that go great with these slides that you could read if you'd like more information. And of course, you are welcome to come to the store and ask me yourself. I would love to see you. So we're going to go ahead and begin. One moment here. Let me pull this up. So why your salt shaker isn't as harmful as it's been made out to be. A lot of people are kind of jaded by the whole information on salt. So we're going to cover that today. Of course, as a side note, I am a wellness specialist, a certified nutrition coach, and I have a 4-year degree in nutrition and public health. I also have dietary supplement training and bioidentical hormone replacement training through Life Extension. So I have a very broad education in this, and I have been doing this since 2014. This class is not intended to diagnose, treat, or mitigate disease. Dietary supplements and foods can interact with prescription medications. If you're taking a prescription medication, become informed about the possible interactions. The best person to ask, and I'm sure you know this or you've heard me say this before, is your pharmacist. It is their job to know what you should and should not be taking or consuming while you're on certain medications. All right. So of course, we have to discuss our 5 founding principles, what makes our store unique from the others. One is my personal favorite, our focus on nutrition education. We have the highest quality standards. If it's not good for you inside and out, as well as for the environment, we won't let it in the store. Everyday affordable pricing, so we can beat most of the prices of Whole Foods, Sprouts, and other competitors. And we do support our local communities. So we do fundraising for companies. We do let vendors come in, well, we used to before the pandemic, and they would advertise their companies for you so you knew what's available to you in your area. And of course, the company takes great care of us, and they've definitely shown it during this past year. So we have seen the headlines demonizing salt. This is true. We've all been told too much salt is so bad for us, and it's always really bugged me because I've read a lot of information about how we really literally cannot live without salt. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I'm sure you've all heard it. As you can see, these headlines: eating too much salt is killing us. Keep holding the salt, so keep away from it for the good of your heart. Public health takes aim at sugar and salt. New research reveals salt kills 1.6 million people a year worldwide. So know where these sources are coming from too, and make sure that when you read something like this, that you really look into the details. They'll try to post a clinical trial that was like 5 people, and they all had health issues, and they don't mention that. So, and then they blame the salt. That's happened with eggs as well. So you really have to know what to look for when you're reading these articles. Okay. So the dietary guidelines urging low salt are very common. We've heard the guidelines: eat less saturated fat, limit your added sugars, eat more fruit, vegetables, and whole grains, and dramatically cut down salt. Such claims have led many of us to view the salt shaker as toxic. I have met people who have said they have an absolutely no salt diet, no salt added to anything. They do all their own cooking, and they're wondering why they don't feel good. All right, so there's a reason why they aren't feeling good. It's because they have no salt, and we actually need salt to live. So according to the research, most of us don't need low salt diets. For most of us, more salt would be better for our health rather than less. And that's huge because a lot of people have spent a great deal of their life avoiding salt completely. So doesn't too much salt lead to high blood pressure? Not necessarily. Also known as the salt blood pressure hypothesis, the current paradigm suggests that greater salt consumption leads to chronically high blood pressure, which increases the risk for cardiovascular disease. This belief has led to the current low salt guidelines, which recommend less than 2,300 milligrams per day, which is only a teaspoon, and less than 1,500 per day if older, for African American or high blood pressure. So if you are older, African American, or have high blood pressure, they're telling you to cut your salt back, cut it down to 1,500 milligrams per day, opposed to the 2,300 milligrams. Okay, and that's really not a good idea. It can actually affect us physically, mentally, neurologically. There's a lot of problems that can occur from cutting salt back too far. So to understand this, it's helpful to know where we got these recommendations. So in 1950 to 1960, the war on salt reached its turning point with the work of Lewis Dahl, whose rodent studies supported the idea that high sodium diets increased blood pressure and mortality risk. Not commonly known is that the rats used in these studies were selectively bred to be sensitive to salt. Okay. Additionally, they were also given extremely high amounts of sodium, equating 60,000 to 80,000 milligrams in humans. We would not consume that much salt in any given day. And this happens a lot in these rat studies. If you read on them, you'll see that they're given copious amounts, like more than we would ever consume in any time. And that's why they have these negative effects, not to mention that they were selectively bred to be salt sensitive, which makes this a garbage study, right? We know that basically we were lied to. So despite flawed science, Dahl's work and the opinions of other key voices helped to establish public health policy moving forward. And this included the 1977 guidelines, which urged all Americans to cut down on their sodium intake to reduce their risk of hypertension. All right. These guidelines would go on to radically impact food policy, industry regulations, school lunch programs, and physician standards of care for decades. In a study conducted by Kirkendall and colleagues, middle-aged men with normal blood pressure found that changing from a very low sodium diet of 230 milligrams, I'm not even sure how they were functioning, daily to 9,430 milligrams for 4 weeks led to no change in body water or blood pressure. So that alone is a phenomenal study because they were middle-aged men, and those are the ones who tend to be told to avoid salt. They tend to have high blood pressure. They're going by those political guidelines, basically, and they had absolutely no change in body water or blood pressure during that extreme salt hike. So 9,000 is pretty high. And I've done diet breakdowns for people who were consuming, 3,500 to 4,000, but it's not true. So we've been lied to yet again, just like we were lied to about fat and sugar. So from 2016 to 2017, a Cochrane meta-analysis of 185 studies declared that the harms of a low sodium diet may outweigh the benefits. Specifically, low sodium interventions lowered blood pressure only minimally, while significantly raising levels of kidney hormones, stress hormones, cholesterol, and triglycerides. All right. In a large international study, researchers found that compared with people who had an average sodium intake of 3,000 to 6,000 milligrams per day, the rates of heart attack, stroke, and death were higher among those who had a lower sodium intake of less than 3,000. So these results held true regardless of whether participants had high blood pressure or not. And that's really important to know because whether they had high blood pressure or not, they were at higher risk of heart attack with less sodium than they were actually allowing sodium into their diets. So in the book, The Salt Fix, those with mild hypertension, 2/5 of them, or 41%, had an increase in blood pressure. 37% of people with actual hypertension noted increases when salt restriction was applied. When there is a reduction, it's more likely due to dehydration, promoting less blood volume. So when you're not holding water, the blood volume goes down, and that's what they're saying is actually happening. It's not that you've lowered your salt, it's that you're not holding water anymore, so your blood volume goes down, which looks like lower blood pressure. So too little salt has been linked to symptoms like fatigue, dizziness, lethargy, and cognitive impairment. Low salt diets lead to greater stress on the heart and cardiovascular systems. by increasing heart rate and promoting weight gain. Numerous other studies have similar findings. Salt restriction in hypertensive adults for 30 days was shown to increase triglycerides, inflammatory markers, and insulin resistance. So low sodium diets cause kidneys to work harder. They are working harder to reabsorb needed sodium, and this causes the kidneys to use up cellular energy stores, promoting fatigue and causing weight gain. Salt supports healthy insulin levels, normal metabolism, and weight maintenance, and salt restriction in non-treated hypertension led to higher triglycerides. So when you're restricting your salt, you're actually risking your triglycerides going up. And then there was the Korean paradox. The typical Korean diet, rich in salty foods, including fermented veggies like kimchi, salty soups, and side dishes, and soy sauce, contributes an average of up to 5,000 milligrams of sodium per day. Despite such high sodium intakes, Korean people have some of the lowest rates of hypertension and death from cardiovascular disease. The same can be said of the French, the Japanese, and the Mediterranean diets, all which are higher in sodium. So again, we're victimizing salt when it's not the problem. Even in populations with high sodium intake, they do not have a greater risk for cardiovascular disease. The average life expectancy in Korea is 80 or higher despite their high salt intake, and cardiovascular diseases are not common in Korea, regardless of these 5,000 milligram sodium intakes. Just a side note, the difference between salt and sodium is that sodium occurs naturally in food, and salt is composed of two minerals, sodium and chloride. 1 teaspoon of salt is 2,300 milligrams of sodium. And that's the limit for the healthy person in America, which we're also seeing is flawed, scientifically flawed. So the real culprits of poor health, something we've been saying for a long time, it's not the salt you should be worried about. It's actually processed food and excess sugar, which we keep driving home. So many of the negative side effects that have been blamed on salt are actually due to our standard American diet, which is high in processed food and excess sugar. So all those pre-made grab-and-go foods with a lot of sugar and a lot of unnecessary refined carbohydrates, those are really the problem. Processed foods rich in refined salt and low in other necessary micronutrients create nutrient imbalances, and these promote poor cardiovascular health. In contrast, unrefined salt as part of a healthy nutrient-dense diet provides sodium in context of other minerals, which includes potassium and magnesium, and these work together to support healthy blood pressure and cardiovascular health. So we should not be demonizing salt, we should be demonizing sugar. And added sugar, obviously not the natural sugar that comes from fruit. When you eat an apple, that's not what we're talking about, okay? So 80% of people with hypertension have been found to have an insulin resistance. We have no dietary need for sugar, but we do need and require salt. That's something to remember because a lot of people still continue to eat sugar. They still grab the donuts and the cookies and the things we love but really weren't created to eat, but we'll drop salt. And salt is something we can't even think without. So it's definitely something to think about. So you have your excess sugar and refined carbs causing high insulin and insulin resistance and causing high blood pressure. So insulin, in addition to helping lower blood sugar, also works on the kidneys to reabsorb sodium, provoking sodium retention and higher blood pressure. Additionally, excess consumption of sugar is also a driver of insulin resistance. So insulin resistance not only leads to higher and higher amounts of insulin, which promotes greater sodium retention, but also causes excess secretion of hormones that stimulate blood vessel constriction. So it's really important to understand what's actually happening, and salt is not the problem. It's not the bad guy. We need salt. It's absolutely imperative for us to function. We can't live without it. It's part of who we are. So salt is an essential nutrient. That means you have to get it from your food, just like omega-3s. As an example, we can't make it, just like B12. We can't make it. It has to come from food. So it's an essential nutrient in which the body depends on to live. That means what? We can't live without it, right? So adequate salt supports numerous areas of health, including cell-to-cell communication and transmission of nerve impulses, optimal hydration, healthy energy levels and mental focus, normal metabolism, healthy weight maintenance, blood sugar balance, bone formation, strength, reproduction and fertility, exercise performance and maintenance of muscle mass, healthy immune system, and microbial balance. All of these things could not happen without salt consumption. Okay, we absolutely need it. So our modern day lives increase our need for salt. It's imperative, as I said before. So additionally, due to greater prevalence of chronic health conditions, frequent use of prescription medications, high caffeine consumption, many of us are at greater risk for salt depletion. Chronic stress activates our body's flight or fight response, leading to frequently elevated cortisol levels, and cortisol acts as a salt releaser, which encourages salt wasting and depletion. There's also digestive disorders, high blood sugar, people on antidepressants and diuretics. These people are all at risk for sodium depletion due to malabsorption and waste. Hypothyroidism may also cause salt wasting, and this is also due to salt malabsorption. So remember that when we're not healthy, when we have immune disorders, when our stomach isn't working properly, if you're on a lot of antibiotics, a lot of these things are going to affect your flora and your gut function and your health in general, which will make it so you're getting even less salt. So really cutting back on salt when you're probably not absorbing it correctly isn't the best idea. So how much salt? If left unrestricted, most humans naturally gravitate toward a set point or intake of 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams of sodium per day, 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of salt. In contrast to sodium restriction, which focuses on the minimum amount needed to survive, this amount focuses on the amount needed to thrive and maintain optimal health. So again, we're looking at almost over double the amount of what the FDA has stated is the recommended daily allowance for a healthy person. So the recommended daily allowance is 2,300. They're saying if you have high blood pressure, you should cut it down to 1,500, but the science has shown that that actually makes it worse. So it's not the salt, it's the refined sugar, the refined salt, which we will talk about in a few slides, and the processed food, which is giving us no nutrients, no nutrient balance, and it's screwing up our entire metabolism. All right, so our salt set point is maintained by sensors in our brain that act as an internal salt thermostat. When sodium levels are low, our thermostat causes us to crave more salt and vice versa. So if you have enough salt, you aren't going to find yourself wanting it. But if you ever have that day or that time of day where you're like, wow, you know what? Potato chips sound really good right now. It's not really the potato chips, it's the salt that you're craving, which might actually be a trigger for an electrolyte drink or an electrolyte supplement to get that salt back into your system instead of eating junk food. So our body protects itself from salt excess. There are conditions where it is a concern. So if you have hyperaldosteronism, Cushing's disease, or Little syndrome, which is excess reabsorption of sodium in the kidneys, that is when, of course, you will have to watch your salt. But that doesn't mean you cut it out entirely, and you will just be making sure that you're not taking in as much as what we're talking about today. By listening to your innate natural cravings for salt, you can naturally guide yourself back to the ideal amount for your body. Focus on consuming a whole nutrient-dense diet, adding in natural unrefined salts and whole salty foods like olives, sardines, pickles, and sauerkraut. Adding salt to your food allows you to enhance food's flavor, gain more satisfaction from eating healthier, real food. So salting your potato isn't sounding so bad right now, right? So what's the best way to increase your salt intake? How should you choose your salt? most salt has been refined. So it is important that you choose the right kind. And of course, at Natural Grocers, we always have the right kind. But since most salt has been refined, it's demineralized, chemically processed, it's been bleached, and they add things to it. So if your salt lists one of the following common ingredients, it's been refined or processed. So all this down here: sodium iodide, silicon dioxide, magnesium carbonate, calcium silicate, potassium iodide, potassium chloride, dextrose, which is sugar, and then anti-caking agents. So when it has other ingredients in it, it has been manipulated, and that's something that you need to keep in mind. And this includes traditional table salt. So unfortunately, table salt, like Morton's, I think it's called, they're just refined. It's refined salt. So you're not getting any nutrients from that salt at all. It's just salt or sodium chloride. So avoid refined table salt. You have your fine crystals, white in color. They're highly refined, heavily ground. They contain additives like anti-caking agents and dextrose. They're mined throughout various parts of the world, so you don't really know where it's coming from. And it only contains 2 minerals, sodium and chloride. And if it's iodized, it contains added iodine. Which of course we need iodine too. You can take that in a supplement form and get more from it. But we don't really need our salt iodized anymore because we don't have an issue where people are deficient in iodine as much as when this came about, when iodizing salt was a trend. So the best salt is an unrefined salt, one that has not been processed and still has all of its natural trace minerals. Typically, a good healthy salt has color to it and is naturally higher in nutrients. So like Himalayan salt is a good example, or Celtic sea salt. Those are both great examples of a good salt, a healthy salt. All right, so Redmond real salt is one to consider. It's sea salt, it's coarse, it can be granular, it can be fine, sweeter in flavor than Himalayan, mined from an underground ancient seabed in central Utah, unrefined, no additives, chemicals, or heat processing, and unadulterated by pollutants found in modern seas, contains 60 plus trace minerals, higher calcium and iodine compared to other sea salts. So even though iodine's not added, it has been tested and found that it is in there. So not in as high of amounts as what they add to like Morton salt, but you're going to find that 60 minerals plus iodine, that's pretty amazing. You will not find that in table salt. All right. Then we have the Celtic sea salt, as I mentioned. You'll notice it's like a beigey gray color. That is from clay lining of beds, coarse texture. It's moist and damp, so it's a softer feel if you actually touch it, feel it. Purity considerations unrefined, so no additives, no chemicals or heat processing, may contain trace amounts of metals, and that's because it's from natural sources. It's sourced from modern oceans off the coast of Europe, Hawaii, and Guatemala. And it contains 74 trace minerals, higher magnesium content, and some iodine. So the natural iodine in these salts is not high, and it's important to understand that. So if you were relying on your table salt to give you iodine, and honestly that's not necessarily the best way to get it either, you really should supplement with iodine if you've been told that that you need more of it in your diet. And then Himalayan, the pink color, coarse and fine grind, earthy flavor. You can also soak in it because it does have magnesium. Unrefined, no additives, chemicals, or heat processing, unadulterated by pollutants found in the modern day seas. Its sourcing is ancient seabed deposits in and around Kehra, Pakistan. And then the nutrient profile is 84 minerals and trace elements, and they have a higher potassium content. So again, probably not enough iodine to support or to provide you the daily iodine that you need. So if you do switch to the better salts, which this is what we're encouraging, make sure that you are getting iodine in your diet. And then we have the Hawaiian black and red salt, black from activated coconut shell charcoal and red from volcanic red clay. It's sweet in flavor, unrefined, no additives, chemicals, or heat processing, sourced from isolated islands with less pollution. It comes from the Pacific Ocean near Hawaii and contains 80 naturally occurring trace minerals and electrolytes, little to no iodine. And then there are other solutions. So electrolytes are always a great solution if you don't eat a lot of salt, if you really aren't a salt person, but you're sure that you're not getting enough. You might want to bring in something like electrolyte stamina or the sport salts into your diet, especially if you're active. We need more because if we sweat, we're losing salt. So it doesn't hurt to have this on hand, or if you're on a keto diet, people on keto diets do need to add in electrolytes because they're losing a lot of that from the foods they're not eating. Pure Planet sport salts and trace minerals contain essential trace minerals, sodium, magnesium, and potassium, and this supports optimal hydration, muscular comfort after exercise, and exercise recovery, and the occasional stress-related stiffness from physical activity. So it is good to bring this in if you really don't want to start salting your foods, or if you're not ready to make the switch, or you need to mentally build yourself up to bring salt into your diet, which I understand. So we do have some books here, The Case Against Sugar, The Salt Fix. We do have a little book nook next to my office if you ever want to come take a look. And of course, we have the article about salt and the history of salt. So if you are interested and you'd like this article, I have given it to Desiree so that she can give it to you if requested. And of course, you can always stop by the store and ask for it because we're happy to see you and happy to help. So thank you so much for attending this presentation. And remember that if you did sit through the whole thing and listen and learn something, that you mention it next time you come in, and you are going to get a $5 coupon for attending and listening to the entire nutrition presentation. So thank you so much. Again, I wish I could see your faces. I'm sorry I can't, and hopefully someday soon, right? Fingers crossed. I will talk to you all later. Have a great day. Bye. Bye.